If I could go back in time and change my childhood, I probably wouldn't. I know that sounds quite crazy, but most people would assume that I hate my parents or that I wish things were different. But to be honest, the truth is, I'm actually quite grateful I had abusive parents, and by the end of this video, you might understand why. Now, I'm not saying what they did was okay. It wasn't, but I'd certainly learned something that most people never do, and that's how to turn the pain of trauma and abuse into developing my own character personally, and how to break the cycle, how to build myself as a person and overcome the adversity. And before you think I'm just saying this for attention, let me give you some context. I grew up in a household where love was certainly conditional and fear was quite normal, where I had to learn to survive in ways that a child definitely shouldn't. But instead of just letting that destroy me, I used it to shape me. It made me stronger. So in this video, I'm gonna express a little bit of vulnerability and share just a glimpse of my story and show you as to why I wouldn't change a thing. Now, growing up, I thought my home life was pretty much just, how things were. I didn't realize that the way my parents treated me was not normal. And until I visited a friend's house for the first time, I literally couldn't believe how other people lived. I mean, I have an experience where I remember sitting at a dinner table and I was watching my friend's mom ask how their day was and not interrogating them or not being aggressive, not being stressed. There was no reason to yell. She just cared about, how her kids were getting on. And it was the first time I saw sort of like, I guess kindness and mothering from another person's parent towards them. And personally, in my experience, both of my parents would get home and they would be at each other's throats. They would be physical towards me and they would be aggressive a lot of the time. I certainly felt as though I was constantly walking on eggshells. If I made a single mistake, I spilled something, or I did something silly, or I talked back, or I looked at them the wrong way, it could literally turn into like me getting screamed at, me getting shut in my room, or complete neglect for like long periods of time. They would just treat me as though I'm, little and not there. And sometimes that silence felt heavier than being screamed at. And I compared that in my mind to how I realized quite quickly that home is supposed to be a safe space. Seeing that my friends had a safe space where they could just be themselves, it hit me that mine certainly wasn't. But here's the thing, when you grow up in sort of like an anarchy, chaotic environment, you don't realize how much it's shaping you and developing you. And in my case, it certainly forced me to learn certain skills that no child really should ever need. When you live in a home where anything can set someone off, you certainly learn to adapt pretty quickly. And in that time frame, I definitely became, I would say, a master at reading just moods, other people's moods, and being very intuitive before I even spoke. I could tell how the night was going to go just by, like I said before, the way my parents came home after their day at work, or how their body language was. And it sort of taught me when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to apologize things, just to essentially keep the peace. And that's really not childhood. That's just, survival. And for a long time, I thought that was just how life worked. But there was a moment in my childhood where I sort of realized I had a choice to allow this behavior, this reactionary behavior of however they were doing, to sort of define me, or to, take control of it, because it also bled into my social circumstances, being at school at the time, or trying to make friends, being in social groups, in sports. And I realized pretty quickly that I just wanted to change. And so I started doing something which was essentially just kind of ignoring what I was going through. And the thing I learned is that just because you leave the thing, or you pretend it's not there, or you remove yourself, it doesn't mean you're healing from it. I had to figure out what to do with the sort of the anger that I had built up inside of me, and that's when things sort of changed for me. Because at the start of it, I was just very angry. I was angry at them, I was angry at myself, I was angry at the world because I didn't understand how reality was, and I felt like my life was kind of not real in a way. And I started to go through like this period of dissociation within myself where I kind of just stopped caring about myself, and I just became very numb. I remember I had experiences where I would do something wrong, apparently, according to my parents. And, you know, I didn't really do much wrong. I was just a kid. I was just probably playing football or kicking the ball at a wall or something. And I would get like grabbed and locked in my room for a day or two. And I was allowed like 2 meals, and it would be like bread and soup and 1 book. And I was just locked in a room for like 48 hours, and I had to just behave. And I look back now as an adult in his mid-20s, and I just see how fucked up that was. Me personally, if I ever had kids within probably my early future, then I wouldn't be looking to treat them that way. I don't think that form of punishment is the right way to be. But to be honest, now that I am older, I've been learning about trauma and psychology, healing a lot more, and surrounding myself with people who actually care. And that is certainly a complete difference from the life I had growing up. So now I'm in a position where I get to share my story on this platform, and it's not for sympathy. I don't want any validation, you know, but if there's just someone out there who also feels, you know, maybe stuck, or they're feeling some pain, it doesn't have to be with your parents. It could be with a friend, or it could be with your partner. I want you to know that you don't have to be stuck in that situation. I mean, me as a kid, I didn't really have a choice, unfortunately. However, there are people you can reach out to, people you can talk to. If anyone wants to drop a comment on this video, it would certainly be a safe space to have a conversation about maybe something someone you know of, or something you're going through. You don't have to remain in those situations. And in my experience, when I was younger, I'm certainly grateful for my abusive childhood. And the reason being is it really enabled me in now my adult years to have a very thick skin. Pretty much nothing bothers me, but I'm incredibly emotional in the way that my emotional intellect is quite high. I'm not an emotional person. I'm certainly very stoic, and I'm still quite numb in my adult years as opposed to my being a child. And I'm certainly proactive now instead of reactive, and I've matured past my trauma that I went through in my experience and that I've healed from. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not grateful for the abuse that I went through, which a lot of it was quite dark and very nasty, and I don't want to go too deep right now on this new channel, but I'm grateful for what I made out of it, which was the character that has a level of resilience and a level of mental strength that can pretty much take on tasks in the real world with not much problem, because what I went through in the past was so much more difficult than anything I could go through now. And second to that is seeing it in relationships. I mean, as soon as in the past I've met girls, I know which ones have a degree of trauma within them, or have gone through something, and a lot of them project it onto their relationships, and I can spot the red flags regarding abusive partners very quickly because I grew up in an abusive household. And I want to say, I don't blame my parents, really. It's their responsibility to be good parents to me at the time, but I come from a bloodline of my parents were abusive to me, and my parents were abused by their parents and their parents and their parents and so on. So there's just this knock-on effect of just shit being passed down the bloodline until eventually it's come to me, and I'm the one that wants to break the cycle and actually do something about it and become a good person. And so this cycle doesn't continue, and I can see more strength going forward within my family and my bloodline, which will be passed on to my children. And one key takeaway for me that I learned, which really helped me from my experience of being in an abusive household, is that it taught me how not to behave. Not enough people in life talk about how not to do something. Everyone wants to know how to do something, but nobody wants to know how not to do something. And for me, taking on things with the focus of how not to do it sometimes really helps me in terms of a process of an elimination mindset. You know, if I know how not to treat someone, the only way forward is how to treat someone. Whereas if you're just trying to figure out how to treat someone, you might make all the mistakes along the way. Now, me personally, because of my experience, I recognize most of the mistakes early on, and so I don't make them because I've already experienced them. I understand how not to do things. It's a little different mindset. I don't think people think this way. It's a deeper level of thinking, I suppose, but yeah, anyway, I've been rambling for too long. I don't want to take up too much time, but if this story did resonate with you at all, I'd like you to check out my other video on setting boundaries, because I really feel like setting boundaries is something that could really help in your personal experiences, and if you're dealing with maybe a traumatic person or someone who's borderline abusive. So YouTube's pretty smart. It's probably popped up. So click here and I'll see you in the next one.